with pivot charts for topic C, and lastly, filtering data by using timelines and slicer. However, sa among groups sir, kay among problem kay mostly sa among members kay unstable ang internet, so we decided to record na lang the discussion and workbook demo. So I hope it's okay, sir.
That's fine. Make sure to upload the resources lang in our shared folder.
Okay, sir. So for the first topic, we have Miss Elaine to report about creating pivot tables. So please to play, Dai.
Hi, may I know who's sharing?
Wait sa sir nga mag-present balik si Elaine, sir.
Ah, okay, sige, sige.
Good morning, everyone. The assigned topic for our group is all about pivot tables. To start with, I'll discuss first the topic A, which is creating pivot tables. So, as an accountant, we are faced with large amount of data on a daily basis, and sometimes this can be overwhelming. When we have large data sets, it can sometimes be difficult to analyze all of the information, thus making it hard for us to come up with a decision. So by making use of the pivot table in the Excel, it would be easier for us to view our data from a simpler perspective. Pivoting, therefore, is a way to manipulate, rotate, or turn large amount of data into summarization of that data. We can group data into categories, break down data into years and months, filter data includes or exclude categories, and even build charts. So this will be more appreciated when we proceed to the workbook later on. A pivot table is a dynamic Excel data object that enables you to analyze data by pivoting columns and rows of raw data without altering the raw data. By pivoting Excel, summarize your values by row and column. Data that can be grouped like company names, cities, states or provinces, product codes and names are good example of items that can be used as row or column headings. Values are data that can be summarized, averaged, or calculated for a percentage. Example of values includes quantities, price, and counts of values both numeric and text-based. Also, take note of the phrase. Analyze data by pivoting rows of raw data without altering the raw data. So always remember that pivoting does not affect or alter your raw data. It only modifies your view of data. Pivot tables are effective for summarizing large values of data according to two or more criteria to return specific answers to your question. Let's say we wanted to answer the question, what is the amount sold by each salesperson? For that sales data shown in the left, answering this question could be time consuming and difficult. Each salesperson appears on multiple rows, and we would need to total all of their different orders individually. Fortunately, a pivot table can instantly calculate and summarize the data in a way that both easy to read and manipulate. Once we've created a pivot table, see the right picture in the PPT, we can use it to answer different questions by rearranging or pivoting the data. So in instance, nakibona dayon ta na ang amount sold by Brenna kay 3,700. In short, we can manipulate the table according to the question that we are trying to answer. But then again, di pa kay nato ni ma-appreciate. Hi, lagi. Magwata sa workbook later. Excel 2013 has a new feature recommended pivot tables under the Insert tab. You can generate a new pivot table in Excel 2013 in a snap with the new recommended pivot tables command button if creating a new pivot table with a quick analysis tool in Excel 2013 is too much work for you. In this feature, Excel determines pivot table layouts based on your data. From this starting point, you can change the arrangement of fields in the pivot tables for additional analysis of your data. So, amazing jud kay siya. Last hago siya sa atong part kay automatic na dayon si Excel mo create og pivot table based sa atong available data. There is an extremely important consideration for you to keep in mind when creating and working with pivot tables, and that is your data format. Your data format is very essential. Why? Because diri biya mag-base ang Excel sa pag-create sa pivot table. If nagkabuang imong data diha, then di ka makatabang ni anti-Excel, di ba? So pivot tables are designed to work with and work best with raw transactional data. So what are transactional data? According to Technopedia, transactional data describe an internal or external event which takes place as the organizational conducts business and can be financial, logistical, or any business related process involving activities such as purchases, requests, insurance claims, deposits, withdrawals, and many more. Transactional data is not summarized in a way so it does not contain row labels, only column labels. So these column in a transactional data set are also known as fields. So kani mao ni siya, kani yung nakita sa screen. Pivot table fields is the task pane associated with a pivot table. The pivot table fields task pane comprises of fields and areas. By default, the task pane appears at the right side of the window with fields displayed above the areas. Fields represent the columns in your data range or Excel table and will have check boxes. The selected fields are displayed in the report. Areas represent the layout of the report and the calculation included in the reports. In a summarized dataset, even in row 1, the data has already been compiled in some way and will have row label as well as column labels. For example, you may have row sales data for each sales rep in your organization because each rep has its or her own row of data. The dataset would likely contain the total of each person's sales as opposed to each sales regarding of the rep. Although you can create pivot tables from summary data, they will never give you as much granular insight in your data as pivot tables created from transactional data. The Create Pivot Table dialog box. You use the Create Pivot Table dialog box to insert pivot tables into your worksheets. From here, you can select the desired dataset, includes a reference to a name range or table, or select a connection to an external data source. You can also select a location for the pivot table, which can be on the same worksheet as the dataset or another worksheet in the same workbook. You can access the Create Pivot Table dialog by selecting Insert Tables, Pivot Table. The Pivot Table Fields Task pane. Once you create a pivot table, you will use the Pivot Field Task pane to configure the pivot table and perform data analysis tasks. Excel automatically opens the Pivot Table Field Task pane when you insert a pivot table in a worksheet. As the pivot table are by default dynamic, you can drag fields to the various areas of the pivot table fields task pane as necessary and your pivot table will update automatically. You can move the fields around as often as you like and you can include more than one field in each area. Brief description of the various elements of the pivot table fields task pane. I understand ipo pa kay mo ka grass diha sa pagsabot ani no kay kami sad wala pa pud ko kasulay og use ani good but laban lang. Let's learn this in the workbook. So mag-workbook na ta para madali-dali na nato ni isabot. Mo ni siya ang so mo ni siya ang set of data sa salesperson. Kung ani mo bubot kay siya sa niya, hason kayo siya i-arrange ko din siya og mano-mano. Para dili kay siya hason, magamit ta og pivot table. Kaya sa pivot table kay imo na siyang kuan kasi insert the recommended pivot tables. Kung kita din ni mo ang kanang yung recommend mo. Kita din ni largo ang panalitan sa mag-order amount by sale person kaning si Alberto o si Cathy, Albertson o si Cathy kay naa siya sum of order ka yung order 1 kay 2,650 ka Davis o William kay 150. Yung show dahil po ang ihang total sa tanan sales sa mga salesperson na 8,685. Kung ari pud ka sa months sa January nga makita sa Dimlergo nga sa January ang sales kay 500 million 5,175 nya kuan din pud ang grand total nga 8,685. Muna siya ang noun kung imo to siya okay nga kana imong proposal. Pero balik ta diri. Ari sad ta ato ni i-try kaning pivot table. Umar po nga okay ni nimo siya. Pero iya din kang hatod sa kanang ikay mo create siya from scratch. So, kani sa right side, kay mo ni siya ang pivot table fields. Imo ra ni i-click ang salesperson nga i-drag nimo kung asa mo gusto i-drag. Try na to ni ang order of amounts or sa values. O, same ra pud sa katong selected na o ka na selected ka na recommended nga pivot table nga inani mo na amount pa yung na ihatag. Pero kani man gud siya kay makabuot ka kung sig nang nga imong gusto makita. Butang na to diri sa rows ang salesperson. Butangan ba diri na to og months ay sa columns. Or gusto ka ang months na ba diri. Ikaw ra dyan magbuot. If gusto pud nimo tangtangon, kay imo ra ni i-uncheck. Uncheck, uncheck. Ate butang diri salesperson. 14. Ka-weird ato yung anong di mo gibutang. Or zeros na ibalik mo. Okay. Region. Kung gusto, niya kanis mo na siya. Muna mo makita. O di ba wala ni siya sa recommended. So makabot-buot siya ka kung sino gusto. Kanis ang filters kay nice pud ni siya. Dali ra pud ni mo ma-identify nga kana siya nga person kay mo na ang sales. Nawa ko sa i-uncheck. Nibutang na ko siya sa filters. O na. Sa babaw sa kanang pivot table, ano siya, makita dayon nimo. I-check nimo. Kung kasi mong gusto mahibawan, pilay sales ba yun ni Davis and William, i-okay ra na siya ni. Amazing case na. Magawas tayo. Nga na siya mag-drag-drag ra ka. Nice kaayo. Hindi nga sad. So, sunod kay mag try tag create of pivot table chart. Ano yung pivot table chart kay para na nga mas clear yung information sa mga kuan sa imong set of data o mag-choose ra ka diha kung sa imong gusto nga gamiton nga kasi sa pag-layout, bar, pie, line, area, bar, pie. Sige, try na to ang pie. Hindi na to i-okay. Ikaw, okay ani kay apa din siya sa pivot table. Mo na ni siya. Magawas. Nanara ka easy ang paghimo sa pivot table. Sanay na nasad ka easy ang pagpangita ni Crash. So, more na siya. So, yun na kayo. Gikan diri, then mag-insert tab ra ka, niya magpili pa ka or kaning recommended or gusto ka ikaw gid mag-create. Ano siya, hatod ka di sa blank space, blank na Excel, then, na siya, kaninang explain na. Ano siya, imo ni i-drag, mag-drag ka kung sino style. Non-urgent siya ka-easy. So, that's it for topic A.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. So me and my group mates are going to analyze pivot table data. And since we are all business students, let us put it within the context of the business setting. Okay? So let us start. So in analyzing pivot table data, we must always start with a question so that we can end up with a structure. So first, to create pivot tables that will be useful to you, start with thinking about a question that you want to answer. Similar ni siya sa atong research pag senior high wherein mag-start our question. Unsa man siya datong gipangita? What are we trying to solve? Manong wala mo siya gipili. Char. So the premise of what the question are we trying to answer gives us an idea of how would we make the pivot table. So second, prepare the data that is to be used and set it to your specification. So now you have a question. And in order to solve your question, you must collect the appropriate data. Now, similar to research, we tend to gather information that we could use to find the answer. And now from that, we could already create a pivot table from the entire data set that answers your question. Now to illustrate. Now on this worksheet, we have a question. We are asked, what is the total sales for each representative by product? So unsa daw ang total sales sa kada representative sa kada product? So on the left side, we have the data set. So if ato ni manumanuhon to answer the question, maabtan siya tag siyang kay taas siya. So let us create a pivot table. So we have here the pivot table field list. So let's go back to the question. What is the total sales for each representative by product? So unsa ang total sales sa kada representative sa kada product. So this gives us an idea of how would we make the pivot table. Now, I would put the representative in the row labels because we are asked what is the total sales for each representative. Now, I would put the product in the column labels because we are also at by product. So, what is the original question? So, the original question is, what is the total sales? So, unsa or pila ang nabalikya, pila ang sales. So, this gives us an idea that we would put sales in the values tab. So, here we already have a pivot table that answers our question. Now, let's go to the second question. How many products are sold by each sales representative? So pila ang product na nabaligya sa kada representative. So let's also create a pivot table on this. So here we have the pivot table field list. So let's go back to the question. Pila ang products na nabligya sa kada representative? So this gives us an idea the representative will be put in the row labels. Now, unsa to ibutan sa column labels? So how the question is how many products are sold by each representative? So this gives us an idea that we would put product in the column labels. And now we are also asked how many products. So the quantity of the units sold. So we would put the units sold here in the values. So here we already have the pivot table that answers our question. So I hope nakasabot siya mo ato. Let's go back to the presentation. Now, the pivot table tools and contextual tab. The pivot table tools contextual tab displays commands and options that are specific to working with pivot tables. It contains two tabs, the Analyze tab or Option tab and the Design tab. Now, so if your MS Excel is version 2010 and before, tawag na siya, ang tawag ana niya is Option tab. Now, if you have the latest model, ang tawag ana Analyze tab. And the Design tab is Retain. So you would find this on the upper side of your screen. So in a click mo sa pivot table, naanin siya ang pivot table tools contextual tab. And then it contains various groups and commands that would help you modify and access your pivot table. Now, the first tab is the Analyze or Option tab. The following table identifies the types of commands that you would find in various groups in the Analyze tab. So first, the Analyze tab group of pivot table. Now, this contains commands for accessing the pivot table option dialog box, which enables you to change the global pivot table settings. This group also displays the name of the currently selected pivot table. Now, on the active field group, this contains command for accessing field settings and value field settings dialog boxes, expanding and collapsing hierarchies in your pivot tables, and drilling down up in pivot tables created from databases. So this allows you to see the value field settings that you would use to modify your pivot table. Now, we have here the group. Now, this contains group commands for grouping various elements within the pivot table and managing those groups. Now, the filter group. So this contains commands for accessing and managing filtering commands and options. Now, if you want to filter data from your pivot table, you will need to a- access this filter group. Now, the data. This contains commands for refreshing the pivot table data when the source data set has been updated and or modifying the data set to feed your pivot table. So let's say may nausap sa imong information nga nakuha na kay sayo. And then you would need to rectify the data. So imo siyang mausap through the data group. So let us illustrate. So let us say na nasayop ti ay ko aning kani diri nga sale kaning pag September 18, 2020. So this was supposed to be 160 units sold, but I only recorded 16. So to change it, ako siyang i-update and I would click on the pivot table, the option tab, and the data, then refresh, click refresh. So then nausab na siya. Okay, if naka-i-change dire, tapos dili mo siya i-refresh, it won't change the pivot table dire. Now the action group contains commands for clearing, filtering, and selecting elements of the pivot table and moving pivot tables in your workbooks. So if ganun kag i-move ang imong pivot table sa other nga worksheet or other nga location, you would just use access the actions group. Now the calculations group contains commands for configuring pivot table calculations. And next, the tools group contains commands for creating charts and accessing the recommended pivot tables. Now, the show group contains commands for toggling the display of the pivot table elements on or off. Now, let's go to the design tab. The following table identifies the types of commands that you would find in various design tab groups. So first, the layout group contains commands for toggling particular functionality on or off, modifying the overall layout of your design pivot table. So this contains, if naka-usbon sa pivot table nimo nga layout, lahion nimo og format, or nabakaibot nga design, you would choose to access the layout group. Now, pivot table style options. So this contains commands for toggling the display of pivot table elements on or off. And the pivot table styles contains command for selecting and configuring pivot table formatting options. Now, for more information about these commands, you can visit these websites. This actually helped me in, you know, understanding the pivot tables because it actually explain ang gamit ano how to create a pivot table. Now next is the value field settings. Now the value field settings dialog box is divided into two tabs: the summarize values by tab and show values as tab. and the number format feature. Now, the summarize values by tab enables you to select which function in Excel uses to summarize the data in your pivot table. The available functions here are the same as those available for creating subtotals and for summarizing data. Now, show value as tab provides you with access to options for how you wish to display your summarized pivot table data. By default, the value here is no calculation, which means that the pivot table would simply summarize your data according to the function selected in your summarize values by tab. Now next is the number format button. Use this to change the cell formatting in your pivot table to calculate to accommodate the various types of values you ask in the Excel to calculate. So let us show how to see the value field settings. So here we have the pivot table. So to find the value field settings, we must click on the values tab and then click value field settings. So as shown, we have the summarize values by tab and the show value as tab and the number format. Now summarize and show combination. Combining the options from the summarize values by tab and shows value as tab enables you to gain a deeper understanding of the information in your raw data. Similar to our lesson in Accounting 206, we can also perform horizontal and vertical analysis using the pivot table. So interesting guys, kay naabot na po ng atong 206 dali. So how would we use this? Let's illustrate. So let us use this pivot table. Here we have the total sales for each representative for each product. So how would we analyze this one using the combination of show value as tab? So let's get the value field settings, then click show value as tab, and then the show value as no calculation. Let's change this one to the percent of grand total. So here we have uh, the percentage of the product. So here you can see that the sales representative and juice has sold 85.83% of pencils and gaining towards a 0.83 increase in the total sales. So mura gyapon siya horizontal and vertical analysis sa atong accounting 206, which is useful in the long run. Inigapot natin sa complicated na lessons. Now, since nakatay table, naapotay get pivot data function. So once you have a pivot table report, you may wish to extract a small portion to generate a summary of data if the pivot table is too large. Fortunately, Excel provides a get pivot data function as a way to show data from the pivot table elsewhere in Excel. So the syntax is equal sign get pivot data, and then you would just need to fill in the data field, the pivot table, and the field item one, field one, item one, field two, and item two, and so on. So the required arguments is the data field and the pivot table. So the data field contains the name of the enclosed quotation marks for the data field that contains the data that you want to retrieve. For example, total sales. So unsa man imong gipangita. So dapat imo siyang put under the data field. Now on the pivot table, a reference to any cell, a range of cells, or named range of cells in the pivot table report. This information is used to determine which pivot table report contains the data that you want to retrieve. So let's put it in context. So here, ako lang siya ibalik to no calculations. So here, na instances na ang ato ang pivot table is daghan kayo maglisod ta og tan-aw. So if need ni mo one one information, lisod to kay nga imong ipangita o sa imong daghan kayo nga pivot table. So why won't we just use the get pivot data function? So how would we use this? So unsa that gives let's give an example kung unsa to pangitaon. So what if you'd find the total sales for the pen set? Okay.
Hi, would it be okay if we will just continue by Wednesday? It's already 11:30, and then I don't want
Now
to
we would use
go
the
beyond our
function.
time schedule as well. Group 5, would that be fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so all right, so we will just resume the discussion. Just take note of it lang, and then group 5, please also upload no, the materials you have in our shared folder. And then we will see each other and continue with the presentation by Wednesday. Okay?